Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. Sometimes you just have to love the Canadian government. Not because they're doing anything correct, but because they do things so incorrectly it becomes extremely funny. One of the funniest examples of this was just revealed in a committee meeting studying the government's subsidization of both the CBC, other legacy media outlets, and, as it turns out, Statistics Canada. Check this out. We have Damien Currick, the Conservative MP from Battle River, asking criticisms from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation about a Statistics Canada podcast that the government nearly spent $1 million on.
Thank you very much. I think I still had a bit over a minute.
1 minute, 30 seconds. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Uh, it was recently revealed that the government spent over $970,000 to produce a podcast that ended up only having 229 subscribers. That's a lot of dollars per subscriber. I'm wondering if
And yes, it's a podcast by Statistics Canada, not like a podcast about Stats Canada where like the CBC did a podcast and they talk about interesting things that Stats Canada finds out. No, like Statistics Canada. This would be like Revenue Canada or the IRS in the US having their own podcast, and maybe they do have their own podcasts. I do not know, but they only got 229 people to watch. You have to be incompetent in like an extreme degree to have that few people watch your podcast. You almost have to be trying to make sure no one discovers it. Simply putting a podcast out on the internet will eventually have people discover it from just plugging in keywords.
and this was specifically Stats Canada that had paid this close to $1 million. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or feedback about, nearly $1 million spent to produce a podcast that many people do from their phones, walking down the street, whatever the case is, for virtually no cost. Yet the government spent $1 million, yet only garnered a subscriber base of 229. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or feelings about that.
So off the top, quickly, I actually thought I misheard that when I first heard about it. I thought it was government funding other people's podcasts, whatever it was. But no, this was a government department's podcast. It is astonishing that they're spending a nickel on that. And
I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the meeting where they were going over the lack of viewership. That's how incompetent government is. And I've been around a lot of government type people who work in bureaucracies. They will simply think that having a podcast out there or putting out some sort of product is simply good enough. Mission accomplished, put up the banner, we put out a podcast. Does anyone listen to it? Has anyone given us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts yet? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. We have a podcast. We've achieved it. There's a lot of marketing people, consultants who are like this too. By simply creating the thing, we have now accomplished the thing. Like, no, we have not. I do this show for about $5 and a ham sandwich, and I can get thousands of people to watch because I'm not inherently dull, I suppose. I might not even be particularly talented, but I'm not so bureaucratic and stuffy as to make a podcast for Statistics Canada and achieve literally less than 1,000 views. I'm not sure how long it's been since this podcast has been out, but that's borderline impossible.
I'm going to turn this over to my colleague. He's the investigative journalist for the CTF, Ryan Thorpe. Ryan, you were doing some digging on that. It was astonishing to see.
Yeah, so
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Oh.
And you only have 15 seconds. Thanks.
I'll just add quickly that we dug up these records. The costs are ridiculous. They're producing podcasts that no Canadian would ask or be willing to pay for. It's reflected in that subscriber count, and it is clearly a massive waste of.
And that is a perfect way of putting it. This is stuff that Canadians have never asked for. That's why the CBC is so bad. I think I've done it for you guys here before, and I'm going to do it again for anyone who hasn't seen me do it because I only did it once. The CBC also has its own podcast. So let's set aside that Statistics Canada has a podcast. They shouldn't have a podcast. They're Statistics Canada. Why the heck do they have a podcast? But let's even talk about the CBC, who gets $1.4 billion of taxpayer money every year. And I'm going to assume they probably pay per year or per season about the same amount of money to produce their podcasts, or at least in the ballpark of what Statistics Canada paid whenever they do stuff. These are the podcasts that the CBC is putting out. Let's go down to like the alphabetical order part. Is it here? Yeah, right here. All podcasts. This is alphabetical order. Who is watching any of these? Look at this stuff. Look how long it takes me to get through all of the current podcasts that the CBC has been running. I assume these are all the current ones because obviously they turn a lot of their radio shows into podcasts and none of the stuff is from like the 90s. So I assume this is all over like the last few years at least and ongoing shows. Look how far down I can go. Who's watching this one? Who is watching this? Who is watching the 1 in 6 Fertility Journey podcast? Who is watching Other People's Problems or The Outlaw Ocean? Who's doing this? Maybe some of them are interesting, but who the heck is actually going to go and look up all this stuff to see if it's actually good or not? The Spirit to Soar. Who's watching this stuff? Nobody is. And it all has millions of dollars behind all of this garbage. That's the problem with the CBC and anything that the government funds. The quality control quickly goes out the window because we don't have to actually turn a profit on any of this stuff. In fact, the CBC is extremely smug about, well, you know that taxpayer funding is only 70% of our current budget because they do bring in some money from revenue, from ad revenue. How could you not bring in some money from ad revenue? You have a $1.4 billion budget to work with. In fact, in real business, your seed money to do a thing is usually supposed to generate more money than you put in. That's how actual business works. But the CBC's like proud of itself that it brings in like $300 million a year in ad revenue with a budget of 1.4 billion taxpayer dollars. It's insane that these people think these sorts of things. Anyways, I want to go back and look at some of the other things that were said in this committee meeting. Thank you for Rebel News for clipping some of this stuff. I think she just did a really good job of breaking down just how badly money is spent on things like the CBC and, that Stats Canada podcast. So take a look at this. This is another clip of Chris Sims talking here.
The invitation to speak with you all today. My name is Chris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I'm here with my colleague Ryan Thorpe, the investigative journalist for the CTF. We are here to speak for thousands of hardworking taxpayers who want to defund the CBC. This needs to happen for 3 important reasons. The cost of the CBC. Nearly nobody is watching the CBC, and journalists should not be paid by the government. First, the cost.
I don't need to probably show her going over all this stuff, but it was not exactly received very well from the Liberals in the committee, but I think the Conservatives did a good job of utilizing Chris Sims on this. And I just want to jump over into this specific example that she brings up of why journalists should not be being paid by the government, because I think this is the best argument against the CBC, because someone could hand wave away the cost. Well, it's only $1.4 billion, and in the overall government budget, it's not that much money. And technically $1 billion isn't that much money in the overall big picture, but it all adds up. And you could say, well, who cares if nobody's watching it? Is it quality? It's not quality, and here's her laying it out.
Journalists should not be paid by the government. A free press means journalists free from government. A journalist who is paid by the government is in a direct conflict of interest. You cannot hold the powerful government to account when you're counting on the powerful government for your paycheck. The CBC is government-funded media. This government funding has warped the media landscape for decades, putting private media companies at a disadvantage. And so that affliction is catching. Other media companies are...
And she's 100% right about this. The thing is that somebody might say, well, nobody watches the CBC, so how is it competition for anybody else? Yet nobody watches the CBC or reads a CBC article in terms of its per capita viewership is very low, especially compared to its budget. The problem, though, is when the CBC and the Canadian Press and other subsidized journalists are all just absolute manufacturing the same articles. Every single person writes does poor quality reports on a bunch of different topics. Well, you're necessarily boxing out the independent private journalist who's investigating it themselves, because although their work is better quality than CBC, the CBC has a better placement in the algorithm because of the sheer amount of content they produce, the sheer amount of SEO advantage they have. And so even though somebody might read my article from the National Telegraph back when I used to write more, they would prefer to read mine. The thing is that the CBC and CTV and Global and Canada Press and all the other ones, they will eat up a significant portion, meaning that I don't really have the capacity to make any money with written material. And the thing is, it's not fair because the CBC doesn't have to have anyone really read its content for the person to get paid because they're just being paid by the taxpayer. That's why it's so gross. It ends up watering down the entire industry while putting out bad quality content.
Are also on government payroll now. At the same time, trust in journalism has plummeted. About 61% of Canadians now think journalists are, quote, purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or gross exaggerations. Canadians need a press that is free from government so the people can hold their government to account. The CBC is a huge waste of money. Nearly nobody is watching it, and journalists should not be paid by the government. It is time to defund the CBC.
She also brought up later in another clip as well, and I didn't even know this because the CBC's been kind of using older statistics to pretend more people watch them. I think I saw that the CBC, the National, was getting like 3.4% viewership in prime time, but that's prime time with one particular show. On average, CBC content only captures about 1.7% of the market, and its key demographic ratings are even worse. I think I talked about in another episode too, especially its local programming only captures about 1.1% viewership, and that's among 23 separate stations. That excluding the national station. You know, if you add together all the CBC Toronto, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Regina, if you add all those ones together, nobody's watching them at all. And that's always the funny thing. Whenever you deal with journalists from the CBC or from other legacy media outlets, they have this sense that we're professionals. You know, they almost need to flash a badge around to make sure that people know a real journalist is on the job, and nobody watches any of you. Like, people in independent media should make sure not to get too arrogant about how much better they are at actually being able to portray the facts over the legacy media, just because of the fact that I'm not a reporter. I do not go out and report things. And so I do agree that places like the CBC are at least useful in the sense that they do report some facts, but you have to wade through it and see what they're exaggerating, what they're leaving out, and all that other stuff. So we do need real reporters. But the thing is, the CBC, if they went away, it's not like we would lose reporters. Independent media would then fill the gap because there would be actual money in sending reporters out to collect facts. Right now, there's no point in hiring beat reporters because there's like 5 or 6 legacy media subsidized journalists who are out there doing it. And so it's really hard to make a go of it because it's just such a watered down industry that you have to make sure you get like a disproportionate amount of eyes on your work. And with CBC and CTV stealing eyes for their lower quality subsidized work, that means even if you're doing good work, you're probably not making any of your money back. Here is an article from the CBC I want to talk about because I think it just highlights all of these issues in one little place in terms of the bias, the exaggerated reporting, leaving out details, and it also includes a lot of the ongoing sort of international, like foreign interference in our elections type stuff. So here is a headline from the CBC. I have read this entire article, and it says, agents of Indian government interfered in Patrick Brown's conservative leadership campaign. Sources. Who are the sources? Nobody. Nobody willing to go on the record. It's literally nobody. Even the person that they say was affected by this, who was Michelle Rempel Garner, who the sources say was told to back off of Patrick Brown's campaign because the Indian government didn't like him, which it doesn't shock me the Indian government doesn't like him. Patrick Brown is very close to both Khalistanis as well as Muslim Brotherhood activists. But even Michelle Rempel denies she was ever told to back off of him. She explored a UCP leadership race, and then she never went back to Patrick Brown's campaign. And the CBC kind of does this stupid intimation that, oh, she must have explored that UCP leadership opportunity and then dropped it and not went back to Patrick Brown's campaign as an excuse to do what Indian agents were telling her to do. No. Do you know why? Do you want to know why Michelle Rempel decided to explore that UCP leadership opportunity? because she was probably genuinely interested in it. She then probably found out there wasn't really any appeal in her running for it, or she wouldn't have a good chance of winning. And this was a great opportunity to jump off the sinking ship that was Patrick Brown's federal conservative leadership campaign. Because guess what? Even if Indian government agents were trying to influence the election, the leadership election, away from Patrick Brown and maybe in Pierre Poilievre's favor, even if this happened, which the evidence of is very scanty at this point, it doesn't matter in the sense that Patrick Brown was going to lose. Pierre Poilievre was going to win. This harkens to a video series I really like. It's like 6 parts. You can go look it up. It's on Stephen Michael Davis's channel. It's called Bernie Wasn't Robbed. It's talking about Bernie Sanders running in the 2016 and 2020 Democratic primaries. And there's this progressive narrative that he was robbed and he should have been the nominee over Hillary Clinton, then he should have been the nominee over Joe Biden. No, he shouldn't have. And I'm no Democrat. I'd probably be a Republican, obviously, if I was in the US. I'm a conservative in Canada. But there's nothing to suggest that Bernie Sanders would have been able to win the primaries. And they're like, oh, well, Donna Brazile leaked a few questions to Hillary Clinton before the CNN debate. It's like, okay, I've seen what those questions were. They were kind of nothing burger questions to get the answers or the questions given to you ahead of time anyways. And Bernie Sanders wasn't winning those races because people didn't want to vote for him. People weren't tricked into voting for Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders just has less appeal than them. That's the problem with Patrick Brown. This is also the problem with the PPC. I always see PPC people acting as if everyone should naturally be voting PPC, and if they're not voting PPC, they've been tricked. It's this idea that everyone is just a temporarily confused progressive or populist, depending on what side you're on, and we just need to wake them up. It's like maybe people just don't like you. That's the problem. Nobody liked Patrick Brown. Patrick Brown is obviously kind of a sleazy politician. He is one of the sleaziest politicians. He was the one who tried to bring in a carbon tax into the PC Party of Ontario's platform in 2018, and then Jim Carahalios and the New Blue, not New Blue Party. He's running the New Blue Party now. If you live in Ontario, I'd suggest voting for the New Blue Party because it's actually conservative, and not like in the sense that like, oh, it's more conservative than the PCs. I mean, like the Doug Ford PCs right now are just not conservative at all. It's like they're just a retail politics party. That's pretty much it. But Patrick Brown was the guy who tried to bring in the carbon tax in 2018, and Jim Carahalios' original Axe the Tax campaign is what basically pressured him out of the leadership, although they made up some basically like assault scandal to get rid of Patrick Brown that was later proven to be nonsense, because they probably didn't want to admit that it was the Axe the Tax movement and take back the PC Party with Jim Carahalios that was the main pressure point to wanting to get rid of Patrick Brown. But Patrick Brown ran a bad campaign. He mostly relies on diaspora-type politics, which is not very effective to win a race. And by the way, this entire CBC article keeps talking about how the Indian government doesn't like Patrick Brown because he's too close to Sikh people. The Indian government doesn't care about Sikh people. The Indian government, in fact, doesn't hate Sikh people at all. They don't like Khalistanis, people who want to break up India and are in favor of certain forms of terrorism. That's who the Indian government doesn't like. Could they have meddled in the CBC leadership race? Maybe. They also proved themselves to be completely stupid if they did, because there's no chance Patrick Brown was ever going to win, and whoever suggested that they should interview should be fired for incompetence, for being so stupid as to think Patrick Brown was going to win in the first place. That is the big thing here. But the article is all about attacking the conservatives, sort of indicating that maybe Poilievre was basically falsely installed, and there's already a lot of liberals on Twitter and other social media saying, ooh, see, Pierre Poilievre is a puppet of Narendra Modi and the Indian government, based on that somebody might have told Michelle Rempel that you should stop being Patrick Brown's campaign chair. Even if that's true, that's a nothing burger of a story. And also, Michelle Rempel denies it. Who's your source? Name the guy, because that might be helpful for us understanding the credibility here. We even have people like, who is it here? We have Mark Garrettson, who the Liberal MP from Kingston in the Islands, who is luckily probably going to lose his re-election, now trying to make a big thing about this, because this is what the rumor and story mongering about the UC from the CBC is all about. It's trying to create stories like this. It's trying to create pressure points that liberal politicians and activists can press on that are not really. There's nothing to it here. So he says, Mark Gerritsen says, watch, Conservative MP and chair of Pierre Poilievre's Alberta leadership campaign gets questioned about foreign interference and just can't answer it. You can almost feel her pain staring at the ellipses on her phone while waiting for the answer to appear. I believe this is about Michelle Rempel here. Or is it? Oh, no, it's Stephanie Cousy. Sorry, I want to get to the other one here. But I will get to that one soonish. But this is Michelle Rempel, who's like Mark Gerritsen's trying to make a big deal about walking out of the room. She says, Michelle Rempel Garner runs away when approached by reporters about foreign interference allegations in Patrick Brown's leadership campaign. He posts this after she said nothing was going on.
Hi, Chris Van CBC.
Chris,
I just got to ask you about you're running away from me. I'm just asking you about the.
That's the kind of confrontational journalism that's annoying. She's literally already answered his questions, but he wants to generate this moment of Michelle Rempel. Can we ask you a question? And the funny thing is, I'm the type of person who I disagree with Michelle Rempel on tons of stuff. I am not here to defend Michelle Rempel. Not that I'm here to attack her either. But this is ridiculous. Mark Gerritsen shared the article. Look right here. He literally shared the article where she denied that any of this was true. Not that a denial makes it not true, but how is he then trying to shame her in the next post for running away when he knows very well that she already said that this isn't true? Now here is Mark Gerritsen trying to go after, not him specifically, but here's him going after Stephanie Cousy, Poilievre's campaign chair.
thank you, Madam Speaker. The member opposite spoke about character, and I'm just curious how she feels about the CBC story breaking today that India allegedly interfered in the leadership race, and that members of her own caucus were encouraged to step down from helping any leader other than their current leader.
That's not even true. That's literally not true. It was one allegation that Michelle Rempel was told to step down from Patrick Brown's campaign. And I'm pretty sure she was the only one who had endorsed Patrick Brown because nobody likes Patrick Brown. Was anyone told to back off of Leslie Lewis or Sheree or Roman Baber? No? Bueller? Like that didn't happen. But they've already laundered the story into a narrative that, tons of people were told to step down based on anonymous source.
Talking about character, then how does the member opposite respond to these allegations that their official leader couldn't win that leadership election unless there was a finger on the scale?
When was that even alleged? I have literally been in a nomination where people were falsely kicked out of the race for bad reasons. I was one of those people. Look, right there is my campaign literature. And it's probably because someone didn't want me to win, or they wanted their ally to win. Joke's on them. I still made sure they didn't win anyways. The ally that they wanted jammed in. I think David McKenzie is now the nominee for our riding for next election. He's a fine choice. But the thing is that I'm literally somebody who could potentially have a bone to pick and be willing to just believe everything about the CBC story. I don't, because it's full of it. Poilievre couldn't win without a finger on the scale. He would have won anyways. Even if there was a finger on the scale, nothing would have changed the outcome. Did you see the rallies? Did you see any of that stuff? Poilievre was the popular one. I like Leslie Lewis. I even marked my ballot. Lewis won, Poilievre 2, because I'm more socially conservative, and I knew that Lewis wouldn't win, but I want to give her more number ones to show that I like a more socially conservative style to politics. But at no point was she going to be able to win. At no point was Jean Charest going to win. Patrick Brown wasn't going to win, even with his obviously kind of fraudulently inflated membership numbers, because he very much practices the politics of walking into a religious institution and pressuring people to sign up for memberships. Even he couldn't even get half of Poilievre's membership sales.
Questions? The honourable member Calgary Midnapore.
Yeah, thank you very much to my colleague for that question. You know, I was very proud to serve as the Alberta campaign chair for the leader for Carleton. And I can tell you, we swept Alberta. And so I am not concerned at all about the support of the tipping the scale. To me, it just absolutely sounds ridiculous. And I think it's unfortunate that that she would say such things about that. And again, I think it just speaks to the desperation of the Liberal government over there. Thank you very much.
Although I wish she wasn't looking at her phone during that answer. I do agree with her. This is just a desperation move. It's trying to sling mud and hope that somehow this is going to hurt the Conservatives in the polls. It's not. It doesn't stand to reason. Even if every single Canadian read the story, I think most Canadians, as they're reading the story, will start to ask, well, where's the beef here? Where are we actually getting the smoking gun where the Poilievre Conservatives did something wrong, where Poilievre's party, like Poilievre's faction, did something wrong here? Where is it that we can actually see the Indian government changing the outcome? And Patrick Brown was later kicked out of the Conservative Party race, but had nothing to do with like Indian interference, removing him from the race. Again, Poilievre would have won anyways. He had like double to triple the membership sales as Patrick Brown, and Patrick Brown was like nobody but maybe Jean Charest voters' number 2 or number 3 choice. He had no ability to grow, and he didn't have that much support in the first place. And Patrick Brown was kicked out not because, again, of anything to do with the Indian government, but because of his basically shady way he raises money and sells memberships, which is kind of a Patrick Brown classic. That's not something that was at all unsurprising to see. And this was all before there was like allegations made. And also, Patrick Brown was not surging. He didn't have an ability to win. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot here, but it's true. That's why I'm repeating it. Anyways, that's basically it for me there. Sorry, that was turning into a rant by the end of it. But I guess if you want to support the show, subscribe to the channel, like this video, leave a comment. You can always donate to my Give, Send, Go legal fund in the description below, as well as pinned at the comments below. But yeah, this stuff just bothers me a lot because, again, I've been in a nomination where I wasn't treated fairly. It's not because the Conservative Party is bad. I know there's PPC guys online saying, oh, Wyatt got, like somebody screwed Wyatt over and he still supports the Conservatives. Like, what's your logic? That if somebody in an upper advisory position in the party does something nasty to me because they have the ability to kind of manipulate the rules on a small scale in nominations like this, that I am then supposed to hate good people like Damian Kurek or Stephanie Kusi there, or people like Arnold Viersen or Pierre Poilievre himself. I don't dislike anyone who hasn't done anything wrong to me. 99%, probably more than that, of people in the Conservative Party are perfectly fine to me. We have a situation where somebody was able to manipulate the rules, and they're at a high enough pay grade that it would have been extremely explosive for the party to have ousted them or gotten rid of them. And so they just kind of muddled through what was obviously a bad process. And I hate when nominations are affected. It means that you are obviously picking weaker candidates if you don't believe they can even win against other Conservative competitors. That's a bad thing. But then when I see the CBC pretending like, oh my goodness, there was Indian government interference in the CPC leadership race because Michelle Rempel was told that maybe she shouldn't be the co-chair or the chair of Patrick Brown's campaign, and then she tried to run for the UCP race, decided not to, and then she didn't return. Wow, what a concept. It's almost like she knew it was a dead-on-arrival campaign and decided not to come back, especially because Poilievre's probably going to be her boss, so why doggedly keep supporting the guy who's going to lose and has been pretty nasty to Poilievre the entire race? It's just basic logic. People, and the funny thing is, when did the media cover, Signal Hill, the one I ran in? When did they cover any other nomination from any other party that probably should have been investigated? They don't care. That's the thing. They only care about hurting the upper brass of the Conservative Party in terms of big name conservatives. If it has to do with someone like me, well, who cares a crap? Who cares about Leela Ahir also kicked out of this race? And it's like reported on very weakly, if it even is reported on, and things move on. The nomination process in Canada needs to be reformed heavily. And the funny thing is that this is not what happened to Patrick Brown. He would have been kicked out by any rules, even in like a Republican primary. If you're just like, committing fraud, if you're committing financial fraud, you might be booted out. I have to look into what happened with that case if he ever brought it in in front of a judge. But my guess would be that they would have seen that a lot of the stuff was pretty sketchy. Anyways, that's it for me. See you guys later.